This is the newest iteration of the TRM Neutron, one of the most widely praised EDC knives on the market, and this here is now a frame lock. So with this frame lock version, you've got a new look, a new feel, and a pretty huge jump in price from the low $200 all the way up to $365 retail, which is about the same price as a conventional Neutron with titanium scales. But I'm happy to report that it feels like a major upgrade all around and reestablishes what has become a truly classic knife as one of the best options on the market, now at a different price point. So, TRM first made the original liner lock Neutron. I've had this one for a while. In 2018, it quickly became one of the most sought after designs on the market. It's slim, it's lightweight, it's versatile, it's extremely slicey with this thin, flat ground blade. And it was made in the USA. It is made in the USA to a relatively high standard to boot, all for a price that still remains in the low $200 today, mid 200s depending on what particular scales you get. This frame lock version has the exact same dimensions as the Neutron that so many of us know and love by this point, especially as availability of these Neutrons has become pretty ubiquitous by now. You've got a 3-inch blade, you got TRM signature 90 thousandths blade stock, nice and thin here, with their full, it's not quite a full flat grind, there's a bit of saber here, but for most this, it's a full flat grind, nice distal taper out to the tip. This one here is in Magna Cut, which is what TRM is using for most of their knives. They still do some 20CV, but they're mostly Magna Cut these days. In my experience, it is well heat treated. Because you've got this nice grind, it comes down to a great cutting edge. We'll talk about that more later. Obviously, this whole side is now titanium. You've also got a titanium back spacer here compared to the standoffs of the original version. And even though you've got a whole side that is metal now, and by the way, the show side scale is identical to the show side scale on the original. You can even swap the scales over if you want to. Even though this whole side is now titanium, it's only a little bit heavier. This frame lock version is 2.76 ounces compared to the 2.5 ounces on the liner lock, as long as you got G10 or micarta scales. In fact, this liner lock version, I believe, is a little bit lighter than, the frame lock version is actually a little bit lighter than the liner lock if you got their full titanium scales on there. You got the same overall handle shape, you got the same blade shape, and they chose with this frame lock version to use the squared off sort of flat scale style on both the show side and the lock side. You can see here, same bevels, same flats on the top and the bottom. And you can see this titanium side has the exact same shape, the exact same style as those original flat scales for the Neutron, rather than the contoured scales that I think a lot of people have on their Neutrons and Atoms by this point. These are the flat scales on both sides. This version here, this is part of their first batch, came out with this carbon fiber, a conventional carbon fiber here, with a nice peel ply texture on there. And then on the frame lock side, on all of these, they're putting an inlay that covers most of this space above the lock bar, which has the same material as whatever it's sold with on the show side, and has that same light peel ply texture, so it gives you a little bit of extra grip here. And then on your lock side, you got full titanium. There's no internal milling, but again, it's 2.76 ounces, so it doesn't really need it. And you do have a very nice, you can see it there, micro milling pattern, this sort of, these little waves, these little ridges you see here, all the way across the titanium side. Nice bevels, nice chamfers everywhere, everything is nicely knocked down. And then on your lock bar here, you do have a lock bar insert, a steel lock bar insert, so you don't get that lock stick. You did not have that on a liner lock. It's very unusual for liner locks to have lock bar inserts. But other than that, other than those quite obvious changes from the frame lock and the back spacer, it is the same knife. So let's move this one off the table, since I think most of the people watching this channel probably know the Neutron pretty well. I would guess that most of you guys have it. Let's look at this titanium lock side in a little bit more detail. Already talked about it a bit, but you can see here full titanium, relatively thick lock bar here because this titanium side is the same thickness as your show side. So your lock bar relief down here is pretty thin. It's about the same thickness as your liner lock, if anything, maybe a smidge thinner than your liner lock was. Lock bar tension is not too bad, relatively lighter. Never had any lock stick or anything like that. This whole titanium side has a very nice, even stone wash on it. One of those stone washes where you don't really see the milling marks whatsoever. Again, you've got that inlay. I think one thing to, and by the way, this micro milling here does give you a little bit of texture. And honestly, between this Peel-Ply carbon fiber inlay, you can also get this in G10, and if you get it with G10, it'll be G10 over here as well. Between this carbon fiber inlay and this little texture here, there is quite a bit of sort of grippiness to this whole show side. It is smooth titanium, but it does give you lots of things to get purchase on. Here, I'll lay it down this way so you can see all those details in full. Here, it's worth mentioning that TRM is the same company as Halpern Titanium. Halpern Titanium, same factory, same everything. In fact, Halpern came first. Halpern Titanium has been an OEM for other companies making American-made knives for some years. They sort of brought out TRM years ago to show off what they could do and get more OEM clients. Halpern actually, because of the success of TRM in, I think it was 2024, has finally shut down that OEM business so they can focus full-time on TRM. That's part of why we've seen such greater availability for TRM knives over the last couple years, where the production issues that they had years ago, where these things, or I should say these things, were impossible to get your hands on, especially on the primary market for years. Now they are widely and readily available. Every time a new knife comes out, they will usually put enough at various dealers that you don't have to, go to a scalper on the secondary market, anything like that. These frame locks did sell out pretty quickly, but I think there's still a few hanging around dealers right now. But the reason for that whole Halpern Titanium digression is, even though this is TRM's first frame lock, I highly doubt it is Halpern Titanium's first frame lock. They do take the private label manufacturing very seriously, so they don't disclose who they make knives for, who they manufacture knives for. And frankly, while I'm sure I could dig online and figure it out, I do want to sort of respect that and not, blab on who they might make knives for, because it is something they seem to take very seriously. But the fact is, they have almost certainly made frame locks before, and it shows here. Everything about the way that this frame lock is made, everything about the way this titanium lock side is made, is very, very nice. Everything fits together very nicely across the back here. Let's look more closely at this back spacer here. It is a full piece of titanium going all the way from about 2/3 of the way up the scale all the way around the butt, and you've got those milling lines there. Very cool, very nice, very refined, fits very nice and flush with the back there. Again, your blade seats nicely. One thing that I will mention here while we're looking at sort of general fit and finish, if you look at that show side scale, the left side scale here, you'll see, if anything, it fits a little more tightly on this frame lock version here. If you look at the gap right behind the blade there, it is, if anything, a little more tight on this frame lock version than it is on the original liner lock version. Your lock interface works well. Your lock bar relief works well. We'll talk about action a bit, but the fact is, this is a wholly competently made frame lock here. There are no issues with how this frame lock is made. The fit and finish is very good. There's no reason that you should be worried about this being TRM's first frame lock. They have done it quite well. And so you've got this new back spacer here. You've got this new frame lock. Other than that, it is the same Neutron. But those small changes, and you got, and we'll talk about this again toward the end of the review, a slightly higher level of fit and finish everywhere. Those might sound like small differences, and functionally they are. This is still very much a TRM Neutron, but I will say it does feel like an altogether superior product, both functionally and aesthetically. The first major difference in hand that you get with this Framelock version is the action. Brief digression, as many of us learned from the Grimsmo brothers, and some of us know from brains like Chris Reeve with their super smooth hydraulic actions, and we've learned from plenty of custom knife makers, a good consistent action, especially on a washer knife, is, and especially for anything with a detent ball, meaning a frame lock or a liner lock, is really the product of how well the knife fits together. You've basically got four interfaces here, four surfaces. You've got the two edges of the blade, your left and right edge of the blade, and your right edge of this show side scale, and your left edge of this lock side scale. And it comes down to how flat are those surfaces? How well do they fit together? How parallel are they? Are there any imperfections? And if you think about it, just intuitively, if those two surfaces are extremely flat and extremely parallel, then it is easier for a blade that is mounted on washers to sort of slide evenly and consistently with no inconsistency, no grittiness, no friction between those scales. If one of these scales is off a bit, or if there's, say, like a burr on the surface or something like that, that's what causes that sensation of grittiness. That's what causes that sensation of friction, that inconsistency. That's also, frankly, part of why knives start to feel better as they break in. A lot of those tiny little inconsistencies can get worn down to get a more consistent, smoother surface. Well, one of the benefits of making this entire lock side titanium is you do have a surface that is stiffer, that is more robust, that there is just more to machine really precisely than there is on this thinner lock side here. So as the knife gets open and closed, there's more just sort of holding this side flat when that whole piece is titanium. Now, the action on the Neutron has always been very good, but it's sort of serviceably good. It is consistent, it is smooth, it is, it works. But I don't think many people would call the liner lock Neutron's action luxurious or particularly premium feeling. It's really more function over form. The Framelock here feels legitimately luxurious. The closest thing, and this is right out of the box, so this Framelock action feels better than the action on my well broken in, used for a couple years Neutron liner lock. It still has that nice crisp detent on the open, where if you want to snap it open with this thumb stud, you absolutely can. I missed the stud a bit there. It cracks open if you want to, but it's a light enough detent that you can still slow roll it if you'd like to. But then on that open and close, this movement here is just a little bit smoother, just a little bit glassier, even out of the box, than it is on a fully broken in liner lock Neutron. And I do think that has to do with the fact that this lock side is just a little bit stiffer, and the overall fit and finish, the overall tightness of everything on this Framelock version is just a little bit better than on the liner lock Neutron. If I had to think about what the closest parallel is, let's see if I can find it quickly here. Yeah, so if you've handled any of Spyderco's Marcin Swish designs, whether it's this Techno 2, or whether it is the Swayback, the Swish Buoy, the Spidey Chef, the action on this liner lock Neutron feels very similar to that controlled, glassy, smooth action you get on a Spyderco Swish design, while frankly being more functional and in many cases about the same price as those designs, which is pretty cool. So the action on this Framelock goes from being functional, like the original Neutron to a truly luxurious action, to a truly premium feeling action. And that is a really nice upgrade that I didn't necessarily expect with this Framelock. I thought it might be the case, but it's still very nice to see that that action feels improved. But the second difference, which I really appreciate, and which I think a lot of people may not necessarily anticipate, is how much better this Framelock version actually feels in the hand and in use. So overall shape is the same as your liner lock with these flat scales. It's identical. The chamfers are the same. The chamfer depth is the same. The overall sort of flatness of the scales is still a flat scale here. The thickness is, yes, it's literally identical. I knew it was very close. It is literally identical. So why does it feel better? Why does it feel different? That comes down to the weight and the benefit of that little bit of extra weight. This Framelock is only a 1/4 ounce heavier than the liner lock version with G10 or micarta scales. But that 1/4 ounce is entirely in this lock side scale and this backspacer. What that means is that this whole knife feels a little bit more handle heavy than the Neutron, the original Neutron. The original Neutron, it's well known for being a very light, agile, sort of easy in the hand, easy to move, very precise knife that you can just sort of pick up and get wherever you want to. You got this nice neutral blade shape. It's a traditional drop point. It does everything a drop point does well. But it's really with how light the whole knife is, it's sort of always been easy to just grab and go and get whatever you need. The problem is with a knife this light, even though it is a relatively robust knife, I mean, 90 thousandths, it's thin blade stock, but it's still thick enough for most stuff, and a liner lock is plenty secure, even with these relatively thin steel scales underneath. It doesn't always feel the most confidence-inspiring in the hand, just because the whole thing, one, feels a little light, and two, most of the weight of this knife is in the blade. So you can feel, especially when you start pushing on that blade, it can feel like the blade is sort of getting away from you, or like the blade is controlling the knife a little bit when you have so little weight in the handle. This Framelock version instead feels significantly more handle heavy, and what that means is that it's still light, it's still agile. You can still pinch up on this blade, you can still choke back, you can still get everything you want with this blade. It still does everything the Neutron does and does it very well. But as you start to push it into heavier duty stuff, as you start to really drag this through double or triple walled cardboard, bring it into the garden and really hack away at it, do those harder chores around the house, when you've got more weight in this handle, more of the weight is in your hand. And so it feels like you have more control over this knife, especially as it really gets pushed. And the result is, even though this is the exact same shape as the original liner lock Neutron, to me it is more satisfying to hold, more controlled in the hand, and just sort of a better knife, a better feel overall than that original liner lock. It is a subtle difference, so it is not a major change between the two of them, but it is material. I do think that in particular, if you've liked the Neutron, but you wish that it felt a little bit more robust, a little bit more heavy duty, you're going to be really happy with how this Framelock feels in the hand. And the third difference, which I've already hinted at a couple times, is the fact that everything in this Framelock version just feels a little bit tighter. And my one caveat is this could be a general manufacturing upgrade at TRM. This Neutron that I've got is a relatively old Neutron. It's from a few years ago, and it is possible that TRM's liner lock Neutrons are just a bit tighter than they used to be, that they're just a little bit better manufactured than they used to be. Not that this one is bad, but as you'll see, this one is just a little bit tighter across the board. It's possible that new liner locks are going to feel just as good. But if I compare this guy to this guy, the liner lock to the Framelock, again, all these gaps between the knife and the scales, between the overlay, sort of the scale here, and the frame, the way that the screws sit flush on the scale, and probably most impressively, the grind here, the preciseness of this plunge, the sharpness of the edge. This is the single sharpest factory edge that I have ever gotten from TRM. This is the first TRM that I haven't wanted to resharpen as soon as I got it. Because, you know, as I mentioned in my Neutron review, TRM is a great slicey blade, but it doesn't always come with the greatest factory edge. This blade here is just as sharp, cuts just as well right out of the factory as, frankly, my Mike Erie hollow ground Neutron did, which is really saying something. The overall just tightness of this Framelock version does feel a step or two above where the liner lock is. Everything just feels a little bit better put together. Everything feels a little bit more robust. That all could be the function of the fact that, you know, this titanium side is just a little bit stiffer. That lets them make everything a little bit tighter. We're talking, you know, fractions of millimeters here. We're talking like tiny little visual differences, but it does feel more premium. It does feel nicer. And then you've got, you know, little things they didn't have to do, like this micro milling on the Framelock side, like this really nice backspacer here. It's just a nicer knife overall than the liner lock version. And I think that's true even if you got the liner lock with titanium scales. I would say still the fit and finish on this Framelock version is just a little bit better. And that's unexpected. I bought this assuming that it would really feel the same, that it would just be the same knife but with a Framelock. But I would say in particular, you know, I'll really call out again that blade here. The out-of-the-box blade performance on this Framelock version is by far the best blade that I have had on a TRM Neutron, with the only exception being the hand ground, hollow ground version that was a Mike Erie, you know, semi-custom design, a custom blade there, which, I mean, of course that one is going to be a bit better. That's a hollow, this is a flat. But of all the flat ground factory-made Neutrons I've had, this is noticeably better out of the box than the other ones that I've got. So, you know, all of that together makes this Framelock Neutron feel every bit as at home at the $365 price range they're asking for as this liner lock Neutron does at the $210 to mid $200s price range that they're asking for on that liner lock, even still today. Which really brings us to the two most important questions for the Framelock Neutron here. And the first question is this Framelock a better knife than the liner lock? And I would say the simple answer is yes. Ergonomically, the little bit of extra weight that you get in this scale here does, and from this backspacer here, does make this knife feel a little more satisfying to hold, a little more controlled in use, and just a little more ergonomic overall. Your chamfers here, your overall shape here, the shape of this blade, it all remains neutral but great, nicely designed, nice and easy to hold, nice and easy in the hand, versatile. Everything that was great about the Neutron's ergonomics, the Neutron shape, remains true here. But with that extra bit of weight, especially the way that they have pushed that weight toward the butt end of the knife, it just feels a little bit more capable and a little more enjoyable to use. The action is also noticeably better. You know, the liner lock's action has always been perfectly fine, perfectly serviceable. But this new action just feels more consistent, it feels smoother, it feels better, it feels more luxurious, and that is right out of the box, even without a chance to break in. And then you add onto that the simply higher degree of fit and finish that you're getting here, which again, now caveat might be true for new Neutrons as well, but in my experience, this is a better finish knife than my older Neutrons, and this is simply a better knife. There are, however, two reasons you'd prefer the liner lock. The first is the scale swappability. So one thing that I personally love, but a lot of people have criticized with this initial release, is the fact that they put this fixed inlay here. So this, you know, whatever you buy, if this is a carbon fiber show side scale, it's going to come with a carbon fiber inlay here. One, quite obviously, unlike the scale swappability of this original Neutron, you can't swap the scale on this frame lock. Most of this is non-swappable as a fixed titanium frame lock. But also, because they put this inlay, if I were to say swap these gray G10 scales onto the front of my frame lock here, it wouldn't match. You'd have a different scale here than this inlay there. So I really think of this frame lock version as a fixed knife, not one that you're going to swap the scales on. That's going to be an issue for people that really like that scale swappability that TRM provides you, that like to swap the scales, put on different things, put on micarta some days, G10 some days, titanium some days, carbon fiber other days. You're just not really going to have that with this as much, particularly if, the show side and lock side not matching bothers you. I would not be surprised if they come out with a frame lock version without this inlay, because that has been a common complaint of the community, and I think that they might have heard it. And for the record, I love this inlay. I think it looks great. It adds a bit of texture. I personally am really happy that they chose to include it. I think it makes the knife look and feel just a little bit better. But I'm also the sort of person that tends to put one set of scales on my TRMs and just leave it there in perpetuity. I don't swap my scales all that often. If you do care about that scale swapping, your ability to do that is reduced on the frame lock. And the second reason you would pick the liner lock version is price. This is a knife that is $100 to $150 more expensive than your original Neutron, depending on what scales you would get on that original Neutron. It's about the same price as a conventional liner lock Neutron with full titanium scales. And whether that makes it a better buy really comes down to your personal values, your personal value proposition for a knife. This is a knife that feels better in the hand. This is a knife that is more nicely made. This is a knife that has a slightly better action. It is a better knife overall. But those differences, especially functionally, especially when you talk about ergonomics, use, things like that, they are marginal differences. You're talking about a knife that is still functionally a Neutron, and none of that is a criticism of how insanely good the original Neutron liner lock remains as a functional tool still in 2025. So whether this $100 to $150 upgrade is worth it really comes down to whether you are willing in and interested in paying more for that more premium feel, paying more for that slightly better fit and finish, paying more for a slightly better action, paying more for a slightly better feel in hand. And that is entirely a personal decision. The fact that this frame lock exists at $365 in no way makes the original liner lock version worse. And so whether you're somebody that just doesn't have any interest in buying a $300+ knife, or you just don't value the extra, mostly aesthetic, minimal functional benefit, mostly aesthetic benefit you get from this higher end version, the liner lock is still a great choice for lots of people, especially if you are more of a function-first buyer, a function-first user. So those are the reasons that you would prefer the liner lock over the frame lock. But if you are somebody who plays in this price point, you are somebody who likes that premium fit and finish, that premium feel, this is a great choice. And I think the second question that's just as interesting is, how does this frame lock version of the Neutron, stepping way back, compare to the market as a whole? Because you've got a knife here that carries forward everything that made the Neutron great and has made it great for years, but is slightly better in every way. And it's still $365 is a lot of money, but you're still talking a sub $400 made in America frame lock. And that is a seriously compelling value proposition. If I think about $365 knives that are made in America, your small Sebenza here, which is very similar in size, very similar in profile, and it is better in terms of fit and finish, but these are starting to get closer now. This is a $425 knife. Now, when I do my small Sebenza review, I will say till the cows come home that this is actually an excellent value at $425, given what they're providing. But This is a more expensive knife that is as capable, I'd argue probably slightly less capable than this new Neutron Framelock, just because, I mean, it's a little more heavy duty, but this blade is not quite as slicey as the excellent blade you're getting here. Hinderer. I don't have a 3-inch hinderer on me now, but, you know, hinderers are all north of $400. Those are also American-made titanium-sided frame locks. Those are all north of $400. Those are $50 to $60 more expensive. There's nothing that Benchmade makes. There's nothing that Spyderco makes. There's nothing that ProTech makes. There's nothing that Emerson makes. There's nothing that Microtech makes that is sub $400 for a made-in-America frame lock. The only other company that is making frame locks in America for under $400 that are similarly slicey and similarly functional is Zero Tolerance. And I would argue that the level of fit and finish of this Zero Tolerance here, especially when you look at when you look at your lock side here, the Neutron is a more nicely made knife. It's just a little more refined. It's just a little more nicely put together. And frankly, this action on washers is noticeably better than the ZT's action on bearings. This blade, despite these two having the exact same blade stock, the performance of the Neutron's blade is markedly better than this ZT over here, or any of ZT's other, you know, American-made either frame lock. I mean, this is effectively a frame lock with an overlay, but any of ZT's other, you know, American-made sub $400 frame locks, because you do have a few options here. I would say the Neutron beats all of them in terms of fit, finish, and performance. And that's really the only competitor that you've got. And by the way, I will be reviewing those ZTs very soon. And I do think that ZT is probably a little bit underrated these days. But all that to say, you don't really have a lot of great competition. There aren't really any alternatives I can point to you that are better made or cheaper at this $365 price point for an American-made EDC knife. The closest thing, and I don't have one on me right now, is probably the Strider PT, which, like Chris Reeve and like Hinderer, comes in at the low 400s. But it is very nicely made. It is nice and pocketable. That is a thicker knife. That is a chunkier knife. That does have a thicker blade. Strider's grinds are fantastic, so it does come down to a nice thin cutting edge. But that is the closest thing you're going to get if you do want an American-made frame lock that is pocketable, that is EDCable. And that's also a knife that is much less available, and it's just a chunkier knife than the Neutron Framelock here. So frankly, if you want a slicey, made in America, titanium frame lock, this is now the top of the market to me. This is now, if you want something that is premium, something that feels nice, something that looks nice, something that has that refinement, this immediately to me feels like the new best buy on the market in this frame lock version. And I argue that this is now TRM's best knife. I reviewed the Bulldog. My Bulldog is sitting away in a case right now, but I reviewed the Bulldog very favorably, and that remains the first sort of alternative to the Spyderco Native that is a small but tough knife. But that Bulldog is a thicker knife. It's a more beatery knife. The ergonomics are not as good as on the Neutron here, and it certainly doesn't feel nearly as nice. It certainly doesn't feel nearly as luxurious. It's cheaper, you know, it's more competitive in price to your original Neutron here, but if you get the titanium scale, it's the same price as this frame lock. I would say for most people, this Neutron is probably as tough a knife as you actually need. At the extra toughness of the Bulldog, especially with a tough steel like MagnaCut here and the robustness this frame lock gives you, this is as tough a knife as you ever actually need. And this is as tough a knife as you're ever going to really need to use. For anything that is much, much tougher than this, you probably are going to go either way bigger, you know, go to something like a Demco, or, you know, you're going to use a different thing for the task. This is just a better knife overall. It's a more capable knife, and it's going to do the task that most people need better than the Bulldog. Again, it really comes down to whether that price premium is worth it to you for that extra degree of fit, finish, and feel. You could go overseas. You know, there are some great titanium frame locks at that $350 price point that are made by overseas manufacturers. That really does come down to your preferences. And I will say, with the exception of Jack Wolf here, I'm not aware of many overseas manufacturers, even, you know, the best of Riot and Wii and Bestech, that are operating at this level of fit and finish, with this level of carryability, and most importantly, with this level of blade performance that you get out of the TRM Neutron here, especially this really nice blade that I got in the Framelock. I would say that is equal to, or if anything, slightly better than the insane blade grind, the insane blade performance you get out of Jack Wolf. And those are some of the most capable EDC knives on the market. So all that to say, TRM really has another winner on their hands here with the Framelock Neutron. In today's market, I've said it before, I'll say it again, the conventional Neutron remains as strong as ever. This liner lock Neutron remains one of the categorically most recommendable knives out there, and most people, if they just want a small knife, depending on their use case, they might want something a bit tougher like a Para 3 or a Native, but if they want something that is slim, slicey, easy to carry, and versatile, the liner lock Neutron remains a fantastic recommendation and a great knife for most people. But if you want a premium feeling knife, if you want a knife that feels a little bit better, that's a little more robust, that's just a little bit extra, at $365, this Neutron Framelock is now, I would say, the best mid-$300 knife, small EDC knife on the market, especially if you care about made in America. So if you're a fan of well-made knives, if you just like slim and slicey EDCs, and as long as you play in this price point, I think the TRM Neutron Framelock will not disappoint you. It's an altogether excellent upgrade in both the ways you'd expect and some ways you might not have expected, and it's a wonderful addition to TRM's lineup. So stay tuned to this channel for more reviews that respect your time and your pocketbook, and I'll see you again on the next one.